The late afternoon sun bathed the streets of Fairgrove in a soft amber glow as Tasha Reed steered her father's old Buick through the quiet heart of downtown. The car moved smoothly, its engine humming with the familiar sound of memory's childhood, rides to Sunday church, nervous trips to high school debates, and the day she returned home after passing the bar exam. She could still hear her father's voice teasing her about the car's stubborn air conditioning, telling her it just needed some encouragement. It had been 3 weeks since she'd stepped into her new role as Deputy State Attorney, and the title still felt unfamiliar, like a coat tailored slightly too large, but she was growing into it. The grave she'd just left behind her father's was a reminder of why she had to. He had sacrificed everything to see her succeed. A janitor at the courthouse for 28 years, he had never missed a day of work. His hands, cracked from chemicals and mops, had passed her law books with pride. She adjusted the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of herself composed, professional, navy suit, natural hair in a braided crown. No makeup but a clear gaze that had held its own in courtrooms, far more intense than any backstreet stop. The roads were nearly empty as she drove through Maple Avenue, where houses ranged from freshly painted colonials to peeling porches shadowed by trees. It was the kind of street where stories lived on both ends, the kind of place where appearance often decided whether your truth was heard or dismissed. Then came the flicker. Red and blue lights bloomed in her rearview mirror. Her heart didn't race, but it did beat just a touch harder. Even now, even with a badge that read Deputy State Attorney, her body remembered 100 years of history that pulsed in moments like this. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She knew that. Her seatbelt was fastened. Her speed was perfect. Her tags were up to date. She signaled, pulled over smoothly, placed the car in park, and rested both hands on the steering wheel. Everything visible, everything calm. The cruiser behind her came to a halt, and she saw the door swing open. The officer approaching wasn't in a rush. His steps were measured, but his posture radiated control, the kind worn like a second skin. As he neared, she recognized the square jaw and too-tight vest. Officer Brent Maddox. She had seen him in the background of disciplinary reports, never as the focus, but always present in the margins. The tap on her window wasn't a knock. It was sharp, intentional, a signal. She lowered the window slowly, the mechanical whir of the old car breaking the stillness. License and registration. Came the voice. It wasn't loud, but it was firm in a way meant to remind her of something. Unspoken. "Officer, may I reach for my purse to retrieve my license?" she asked, voice even and polite. He didn't answer the question, just stared. She moved slowly, deliberately, keeping her eyes on him as she retrieved the items. "You live around here?" he asked while examining her license under his flashlight. "I work in Fairgrove," she replied, still measured. "Is there a reason I was pulled over?" "You were drifting." "Centerline," he replied, not looking at her. "That's not accurate," she said calmly. "There were no other cars on the road, and I was within the lines. You calling me wrong?" His voice didn't rise, but the weight in it pressed down. "I'm just asking for clarification," she replied, still steady. "If you check the dash cam, step out of the car." Tasha blinked. She looked down at her seatbelt, then back at him. "Officer, I'm not sure I understand the reason for now." She unbuckled her seatbelt, still slow, still composed. Her shoes clicked softly as they touched the pavement. The street was quiet, no one watching, just the faint hum of the engine and the wind brushing the leaves of the oak trees overhead. Maddox walked round the car, standing far too close. He looked at her suit, then at her shoes, then at the Buick. "You a teacher or something?" he asked, voice laced with something just beneath curiosity. "I work in law," she said carefully. "Figures," he said, smiling without humor. "You talk like one." She stood there, dignified, saying nothing more, not because she couldn't, but because she had learned long ago that silence sometimes says more. Maddox walked back to his cruiser, license in hand. She stood on the sidewalk, wind tugging at the edge of her jacket. She didn't need to shout or argue. She knew what to do. Quietly, without drawing attention, she reached into her inner jacket pocket and tapped her phone screen. One name, one contact, one line. She pressed dial. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The other side answered after one ring. "THR." She said only 2 words, pulled over, and hung up. She knew that was enough. Back in his cruiser, Maddox glanced at her license again, his brows furrowing. Then a flicker, a pause, something subtle shifting in his eyes as he read the name a second time. Reed, Tasha Reed, the same name. That had just been added to the Fairgrove Police Oversight Committee files last week. The same woman who had been quietly tasked with reviewing officer complaints, incident reports, and user force patterns. He turned his eyes back to the woman standing by the Buick. Suddenly, his grip on her license tightened just a little. Didn't move, she just waited. Because she knew, this wasn't just about a traffic stop. It was about to become something much bigger. Asterisk. The echo of the phone call still hung in the air even after Tasha had ended it. She hadn't said much, just 2 words, but they carried more weight than the officer, standing 10 feet from her, could possibly understand. It wasn't the kind of call you make in fear. It was the kind you make when you know you've spent your whole life preparing for a moment like this. Officer Maddox was still holding her license, but something in his posture had shifted. He squinted at the name again, muttering to himself, eyes narrowing with what looked like confusion, maybe even discomfort. But then, as quickly as it appeared, he masked it beneath a bland expression and walked back toward her with stiff confidence. "No warrants," he said flatly, handing her license back. "Drive safe." She raised an eyebrow, not moving. "Am I free to go?" "You're not being detained," he said with a shrug. "Just a routine stop." "Routine," she repeated, her voice quiet. He didn't answer, just turned back toward his cruiser. Tasha didn't get in the car right away. She watched him, calmly, thoughtfully, then finally slid behind the wheel. Her hands trembled for just a second as she adjusted her seatbelt, not from fear, but from something deeper, frustration, a quiet ache that hadn't gone away in years. The ache of knowing that a name and a title might change how people see you, but not always how they treat you. She pulled away from the curb and drove with perfect precision, her mind already spinning. She had work to do, and now it was personal. The call she had made didn't need explaining. It had gone directly to Evelyn Sharp, director of the Office of Public Integrity. Evelyn had been her mentor since law school, sharp, unshakable, a woman with nerves of steel and a Rolodex of favors long enough to shake any department. Evelyn was already moving. Across town, in a windowless room 3 floors beneath the State Justice Building, an alert appeared on a secure terminal. An internal review program flagged Officer Maddox's name against a confidential investigation file. The words "subject of inquiry" glowed faintly on the screen. A second alert pinged to the inbox of Special Investigator Caleb Monroe, who had just returned from a long day of reviewing misconduct reports. He recognized Tasha's name immediately. She wasn't just another attorney. She was the one spearheading a quiet but expansive review into patterns of disproportionate enforcement in Fairgrove, a review that had been kept off the books, shared only with a handful of high-level officials due to its sensitivity. And now, the lead attorney had just been pulled over, for no documented reason, by one of the names already under examination. Caleb didn't waste time. Within minutes, he was on the phone with Evelyn. The exchange was short but electric. "You think it was coincidence?" Evelyn asked, already knowing the answer. "Not a chance," Caleb replied. "I want his cruiser footage pulled immediately." Meanwhile, back at home, Tasha sat in her small apartment above the bookstore she used to visit as a child. The space was simple but filled with reminders of where she'd come from: her father's framed union card, a stack of worn law books, and a photograph of her mother wearing a nurse's cap. Her smile strong and serene, she brewed a pot of tea and opened her laptop. The files she'd been reviewing before the stop still glowed on the screen: complaints against officers, patterns of ignored evidence, and one name that appeared more times than it should have: Maddox. She pulled up the most recent file. Her eyes scanned the lines to formal complaints, one civil suit, and a disciplinary hearing that had mysteriously disappeared from record. No suspensions, no reprimands, just a clean record that didn't match the data. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She opened her case tracker and flagged the incident from today, entering the exact time and location. Even if Maddox didn't write it up, the dashcam and GPS logs would place him there. That was enough. At the same time, across town, Officer Maddox sat alone in his patrol car behind the station, engine idling. He hadn't written a report. He'd convinced himself the stop wasn't worth documenting, just another routine check. No big deal. But the unease that had crept into his chest hadn't left. Something about the woman didn't sit right. The name, the confidence, the silence. He pulled out his phone and opened the internal roster app. It took a few tries, but he finally found her name under the Department of Justice, Deputy State Attorney. His stomach tightened. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected her to be connected. He hadn't expected her to know someone who could cause a ripple effect inside the department, and he certainly hadn't expected her to be the one investigating officers like him. Back at Tasha's apartment, her phone vibrated. A message from Evelyn. "We've got the footage." No report filed on his end. "Caleb's team is initiating quiet review. Stay alert." Tasha stared at the screen, exhaled slowly, and looked out the window at the city glowing beneath the streetlights. This wasn't just another case anymore. It had crossed the line from legal to personal, from data to danger. The truth was beginning to stand when truth starts to rise. It doesn't go back to sleep easily. She clicked a folder labeled Oversight, Fairgrove PD, and opened a document titled Phase 2, Internal Exposure. Tomorrow, she had a meeting scheduled with the Police Oversight Committee. It was supposed to be routine, but now, she had more than enough reason to change the agenda, because what had started as a traffic stop wasn't just a coincidence, it was a warning, and warnings, when given to the wrong woman, can turn into something much more powerful, something unstoppable. The early morning sun barely touched the horizon when Tasha stood in front of the towering glass doors of the Fairgrove Municipal Building. She could see her reflection, sharp, poised, determined, but beneath the composed surface, a storm brewed. She took a deep breath, straightened the lapels of her navy blazer, and stepped inside. Today wasn't just another oversight meeting. Today, lines would be drawn and crossed. Inside the committee room, the usual atmosphere buzzed. Quiet greetings, clinks of coffee cups, the rustle of legal briefs, but something was different. The air felt charged. Her arrival was noted by more than one curious glance. A few people offered polite smiles, but others avoided her gaze. She didn't take it personally. In this town, truth had a way of making people uncomfortable. Tasha greeted Chairwoman Delia Gomez with a firm handshake. Delia had been on the committee for over 2 decades, sharp-tongued, politically savvy, and deeply skeptical of anything that rattled the status quo. "You're early, Ms. Reed," she said. "Some things shouldn't wait," Tasha replied. Delia arched an eyebrow. "Then let's not waste time." Tasha opened her folder and handed out copies of the new report and addendum to the original review she'd submitted weeks ago, but this one contained something different. It documented an unreported stop, the name of an officer, and a sequence of internal flags that painted a troubling picture. Maddox wasn't just part of the pattern. He was the thread holding the pattern together. As the committee members began to read, murmurs broke out. Tasha didn't speak immediately. She let the pages do the work for her. The data was undeniable. Over 17 complaints involving Maddox across 4 years, patterns of selective enforcement, several cases dismissed due to lack of proper documentation, and now, her own experience recorded in silence, filed officially, and cross-referenced with internal systems. Delia looked up first. "You were stopped by this officer?" "Yes," Tasha said evenly. 2 nights ago. No ticket, no official report, no justification. "You're sure it was Maddox?" "I don't forget faces, or behavior." Another committee member leaned forward. "And you're saying this officer is already under review?" "He was flagged in the initial sweep," Tasha said. "But this stop proves he knows he's being watched. He just doesn't know how closely." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Delia closed the folder slowly. "So what are you proposing?" Tasha didn't hesitate. "Immediate internal audit. Not just Maddox, but every officer who's had more than 3 flagged complaints. In the past 2 years, every disciplinary hearing that was closed without resolution, every cruiser video that went missing. If we want the public to trust this department, we can't wait for someone else to expose us. We must do it ourselves." Delia tapped her fingers on the table. "You realize this will make enemies." "I didn't go to law school to make friends," Tasha said. "I went to change things." By the time the meeting adjourned, the tension had turned into quiet resolve. The committee had voted to begin the audit. Tasha knew this was just the beginning. She also knew not everyone in the department would welcome the light. Across town, Officer Maddox sat in a diner, stirring his coffee with unusual focus. He hadn't slept well. Something told him his stop the other night hadn't gone unnoticed. He'd checked the internal portal that morning and found a subtle but unmistakable changes. Access to certain case files had been restricted. That never happened without a reason. He glanced over his shoulder, then pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. He said if I ever needed a favor. The voice on the other end was calm. Then you must need it bad. There's a woman, Maddox said, a state attorney. She's poking around where she shouldn't. Name Tasha Reed. There was a pause. She's not just poking around. She's been building something. Quietly. Maddox clenched his jaw. Then maybe she needs to be reminded that quiet doesn't mean safe. That's not how this works, the voice said. You want to keep your badge? Then keep your head down. We'll handle it. The call ended. Maddox stared at his phone, unsure whether he felt reassured or threatened. Back at her office, Tasha was already 2 steps ahead. She'd reviewed all officer files with similar profiles to Maddox and marked them for confidential review. She requested cruiser footage for the last 90 days, cross-referencing timestamps with complaints that never reached court. Every file, every timestamp, every missing document, she kept it all. She was building a case bigger than she'd imagined. But then, something unexpected happened. As she was reviewing one complaint marked closed without action, she noticed a familiar name, Devon Cole, her former classmate from undergrad. He'd filed a report 2 years ago about an unjustified search. It had been buried marked insufficient evidence. She called him immediately. Devon, it's Tasha Reed. He was silent for a moment. Didn't think I'd ever hear from anyone in the system again. I just found your file, she said, and I think you were right to file it. He exhaled, quiet but heavy. They said it wouldn't go anywhere. That I'd be wasting my time. They were wrong, she said. I'm reopening your case, if you're willing. He didn't hesitate. Absolutely. That night, as the city lights shimmered against the skyline, Tasha stood at her window, looking out over Fairgrove. Behind her, case files lay open, names highlighted, connections drawn. She wasn't just investigating corruption. She was connecting the stories no one thought would ever matter, because behind every complaint was a voice. Behind every voice was a person who had been silenced, and now, those voices were rising one by one. She wasn't just shining a light on injustice. She was building a wall of truth, and it was only a matter of time before someone tried to stop her. But what they didn't know was that Tasha Reed had been walking through shadows her whole life, and she had learned how to make them speak. ChatGPT said. The rain began without warning, streaking down the office window like tears the sky had been holding back too long. Tasha stood there in silence, watching the city blur into watercolors. It was nearly midnight, but her office remained lit, papers spread across the table, files open like open wounds, truths bleeding onto the pages. She hadn't been able to sleep, not after what she'd just discovered. 3 new complaints had come in within the last 24 hours, all anonymous, all handwritten, all describing encounters that were eerily similar. Same district, same officer, same threatening language, same silence that followed when the reports were submitted. She didn't need to guess who the officer was. She already knew. But this time, something was different. Each letter ended with the same sentence. We stayed quiet because we thought no one was listening. Now we know you are. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the letters side by side. Whoever these people were, they trusted her. And that responsibility was heavier than any courtroom argument she'd ever made. She was no longer working through red tape or protocol. She was now the keeper of voices that had been buried, and someone knew she had them. That morning, Tasha had found a note tucked under her windshield. No envelope, no signature, just 3 words scrawled in block letters. You're digging graves. She hadn't told anyone, not the committee, not her assistant, not even Devon, who had agreed to meet her the following evening with a recording he claimed would change everything. She didn't tell anyone because she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Her father once said, fear doesn't mean you stop. It means you keep going, but smarter. So that's what she planned to do, keep going, but smarter. She began recording everything, meetings, calls, even her private thoughts. She uploaded every file to an encrypted server with time-stamped backups. Every report she uncovered, every testimonial she received, every mistake they thought they'd buried, she documented it all. Because if anything happened to her, she wanted to be sure the truth would still find its way to the light. She picked up her phone and called Delia. It's late. The older woman answered, voice groggy. I know. I wouldn't call unless I needed to. Delia sat up. What's going on? I need access to archived disciplinary hearings. The sealed ones. There was a pause. You're chasing ghosts now." "No," Tasha said. "I think I'm about to find out who's been keeping them alive." The line went quiet for a moment before Delia answered, "Come to my house." "I'm not sending that over email." Tasha was already grabbing her coat. "I'm on my way." Half an hour later, she sat in Delia's dimly lit study, surrounded by old law books and framed newspaper articles dating back to when the department was first formed. The chairwoman unlocked a small cabinet beneath her bookshelf and retrieved a leather-bound binder marked confidential, internal only. "This isn't just a record," Delia said. "This is a history of decisions made behind closed doors. You're not going to like what you see." Tasha opened the binder and began reading. What she found made her breath catch in her throat. Not only was Maddox protected, he was recommended. Each recommendation came after a buried complaint. Every single vote of confidence was signed by the same name, Captain Ellis, Ward. She flipped the page. There was an old photograph of a departmental awards ceremony. Ward stood in the center, grinning widely, and standing just behind him, almost out of frame, was Maddox, smaller, younger, but already wearing that same expression of smug confidence. Tasha leaned closer. In the background was someone she hadn't expected to see. Her father. He wasn't in uniform. He wasn't smiling. He was standing near the exit, looking directly at the camera, watching. Why was he there? She snapped a photo of the picture with her phone and kept reading. Deeper into the binder, she found something even more troubling. A report from 15 years ago about the death of a whistleblower, an officer who had filed complaints against Ward, Maddox, and 2 others. The death was ruled a car accident, but there were inconsistencies, brake failure, conflicting witness accounts, and a missing dashcam. The report was filed by a young assistant to the state attorney at the time. Tasha felt her chest tighten. That assistant's name was Lisa Herald. Her mentor, the woman who'd encouraged her to take this position, the one who warned her during their last lunch, "Just be careful who you trust inside those walls." She finally understood why. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was Devon, a voice message. She played it, heart racing. "Tasha, I have the recording. I listened to it twice. I'm not sure if I'm safe anymore. I heard them talking, Ward and Maddox, about the oversight committee. About making you disappear. I'm going off-grid for a few days. I'll send you the file when I can. Don't trust anyone, especially not inside the department." The message cut out. Static lingered. Tasha sat frozen. For the first time in days, she felt something deeper than urgency. She felt the walls closing in. She wasn't chasing shadows anymore. She was stepping straight into the fire. And now she knew who lit it. The next morning began with sunlight, but it felt like a lie. Tasha sat in her office, blinds partially drawn, the world outside too bright for what she now carried inside. The city bustled on as if everything were normal: cars honking, footsteps echoing, coffee brewing. But for her, nothing was normal anymore. Devon had vanished. No returned calls, no replies to texts, no social media activity. It was as though he'd dropped off the map, and he had the recording, the one that could change everything. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the wall where her father's law degree now hung next to her own. That was no coincidence. She'd placed them side by side, a reminder of what legacy truly meant. Not fame, not safety, but standing firm, even when you're standing alone. A soft knock broke her thoughts. She opened the door to find Marcus, her intern, holding a manila envelope. "This was left for you downstairs." "No return address," he said. The clerk almost threw it out. Tasha thanked him and shut the door behind her. The envelope was light, but thick. Inside was a single USB drive and a note in handwriting she instantly recognized. "I don't know who I can trust, but I trust you, D." Her hands trembled slightly as she plugged the drive into her secure laptop. The file was labeled simply, "Room 417, 9:12 p.m. She clicked it. The audio was scratchy at first, static. A door creaking open, muffled footsteps, then voices, clear and unmistakable. "She's getting too close. Reed is not just some rookie. She's got files we buried years ago. Then unbury her. Quietly. We've done it before. We'd do anything to her. It'll blow back. She's got friends in the state office. So did Carter. Look where he is now." A pause. Laughter. "Accidents happen." The file ended. Tasha sat frozen. Every hair on her arm stood on end. There was no denying it anymore. These weren't just unethical officers. They were operating like a hidden network, silencing anyone who got in the way. And her name was now at the top of their list. She had evidence, but evidence meant nothing if it never saw the light of day. She needed Alizand, not just anyone in the department. People who couldn't be bought, scared, or manipulated. Delia was one. Lisa Harrell was another. And perhaps the judge who'd once ruled against Maddox's fabricated testimony, Judge Caleb Monroe. He owed no one, answered to no political group, and had once risked his own career to uphold justice in a controversial ruling. If anyone would listen now, it would be him. Tasha picked up the phone and dialed the private number she'd saved years ago. Monroe, came the gravelly voice. It's Tasha Reed. I have a situation, and I need a safe place to explain it. There was a pause. How bad? Worse than I imagined. Come to my chambers at noon. Back entrance. No phones. She hung up, heart racing again. Not from fear this time, but from resolve. Before leaving, she emailed a copy of the recording to a secure cloud drive, then another, and a third, with timed delivery to 2 reporters she trusted, in case anything happened to her. At precisely noon, she entered the courthouse through the private entrance Judge Monroe had instructed. He was waiting, arms crossed, the lines in his face deeper than she remembered. You look like someone carrying truth and danger, he said. I'm carrying both, Tasha replied, handing him the drive. As he listened, his expression shifted, from curiosity to concern to outrage. I ruled in favor of that department, more times than I can count, he said quietly, because I believed in the system. I thought the poison was small, containable, but if this is how deep it runs, it is, Tasha confirmed. And this isn't just about Maddox. It's a culture of concealment. There are cover-ups in hiring, internal affairs, and worse. My father saw something years ago. I think that's why he stopped practicing. Why he started keeping records I didn't understand until now. Do you still have them? I'm working through them, she said, but I need protection. Not just for me, but for the people speaking up. Monroe leaned back, deep in thought. Give me a few hours, he said. I can't promise miracles, but I can promise this won't get buried. Tasha nodded and stood. As she left, the weight on her shoulders didn't disappear, but it shifted. She wasn't alone anymore. By the time she returned to her office, a message was waiting on her desk. A single sheet of paper with 2 words written in red ink. Too late. No envelope, no signature. Just a quiet threat hanging in the air like smoke from a fire that hadn't reached her yet, but soon would. She stood by the window again, this time watching the city not as a bystander, but as a protector. There were stories waiting to be heard, people waiting to be saved, and a system waiting to be held accountable. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow, but she knew one thing for certain: she would not be silenced. The city had changed by nightfall. Not in its appearance. Fairgrove's skyline still glimmered. The streets still buzzed with headlights and crosswalks and neon signs, blinking open, but something beneath it all had shifted. The air itself seemed to hum with electricity, like the calm before a thunderstorm that had already formed miles away, but was racing in fast, ready to break everything wide open. Tasha Reed stood in the alley behind the courthouse, her phone off, her laptop hidden in a safety deposit box 2 cities over. Everything she needed now fit in a simple folder clutched tightly in her hands. It was more than evidence. It was the future of a city that had allowed silence to hold more power than truth. This was the moment everything would either unravel or ignite. Judge Monroe had done his part. He'd reviewed the recording, verified its authenticity with an audio forensics expert, and had sent a quiet summons to the office of the Inspector General. A sealed investigation was already in motion. What Tasha held now were the namesdates, locations, sealed records, a timeline of every complaint that had been quietly dismissed. Every citizen who'd tried to speak, but was either silenced, ignored, or discredited. But she wasn't delivering it to Monroe. This time she was taking it to the public. Tasha arrived at the local university's law forum hall just after 7 p.m. The school had invited her months ago to speak on ethical justice and institutional reform. At the time, she'd accepted with enthusiasm. Now, the timing couldn't have been more perfect or more dangerous. That she stepped onto the stage, the auditorium was already packed. Students, journalists, faculty, community, leaders, and, in the back row, Detective Maddox, his arms folded, his stare fixed. She took a breath. I had a speech prepared, she began, but I'm not going to read it tonight. because what I have to share can't wait behind safe words or carefully written paragraphs. The room quieted, leaning forward, drawn in. For years, Fairgrove has prided itself on the strength of its institutions, but institutions are only as strong as the people who protect them. And when that protection becomes corruption, when loyalty turns into silence, then those institutions stop serving the people and start serving power. She paused, eyes locking with Maddox for a second before looking away. V spent the last 3 weeks uncovering records that were never meant to be found, cases sealed, complaints erased, voices ignored, and now I hold in my hands the full truth. There was a slight murmur in the crowd. Journalists raised their cameras. This folder contains the foundation of a formal federal inquiry, one that will begin tomorrow morning when I hand-deliver these documents to the U.S. Department of Justice. Included are audio recordings, sworn testimonies, and verified internal memos implicating not only individual officers, but members of the command staff in efforts to suppress misconduct complaints and obstruct oversight investigations. Gasps echoed around the room. I make this statement publicly, she said, raising her voice slightly, so that if anything happens to me, if I disappear, if my name is dragged through the mud, if my career is dismantled, this truth will already be known. It's here, it's recorded, and it's been duplicated and secured in 3 separate locations. Maddox shifted in his seat. Injustice survives by convincing people they're alone, that no one will believe them, that standing up won't matter. But I'm here tonight to say, it does matter. You matter. And if we stay silent, we become part of what we fear. She took a deep breath. I will not be silent. The crowd erupted into applause, loud, defiant, echoing across the hall. Flashbulbs popped. People stood to their feet. And in that moment, Tasha felt something she hadn't in weeks. Poked after the speech, Tasha stepped backstage, met by Judge Monroe and Delia, both wide-eyed but proud. You just put yourself at the center of a storm, Monroe said. I've been in the storm for weeks, she replied. Now I've got a flashlight. But it wasn't over yet. 2 days later, Devon resurfaced safe, though shaken. He handed over the original copy of the full recording, which Tasha presented during a closed-door congressional inquiry. Within days, Captain Ward was placed on administrative leave. Internal Affairs reopened over a dozen previously dismissed cases. And Maddox. He tried to resign quietly, but the public wouldn't allow it. Tasha insisted on a public disciplinary hearing. It wasn't about revenge. It was about visibility, about giving those unheard voices their day in the light. And when Maddox finally stood before the board, flanked by cameras and reporters and the very citizens he once intimidated, Tasha felt the weight lift. Not completely. Justice wasn't a finish line, but this was a beginning. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened in Fairgrove. People began to speak. More letters arrived, more testimonies, more stories of courage, loss, redemption. A city that had once turned away from uncomfortable truths was finally beginning to face them. And through it all, Tasha kept going, speaking, fighting, listening, because her story wasn't just her own anymore. It belonged to every person who had ever been told to sit down, stay quiet, and move on. It belonged to the brave, the silenced, the survivors. It belonged to the change that had finally begun, and it wasn't going to stop.